Hello everyone, welcome back. About a year ago, we did a video on some red flags when buying guitars and everyone seemed to really enjoy it. So today, we're gonna do the opposite. We're gonna do something positive today. We're going to talk about some green flags when buying guitars, some good things to look out for that might be a good indicator that the guitar you're looking at might be the one. So everything I'm gonna mention here is kind of gonna be a green flag, something that is usually a good sign when looking at a guitar. Now, don't use this as a double negative. This doesn't mean that if a guitar doesn't meet this criteria or doesn't meet all of these things, that it's bad. This is just stuff that I've encountered from buying literally thousands of guitars from the shop, as well as a couple dozen in my own personal collection. These are all good indicators that things are going to go well. I made a list of 5 things that I've kind of seen come up consistently. Let's get into it. All right, so number 5, and this is one that took me a long time to really realize. Every example of every used or vintage guitar, or even new guitar, is going to be a little bit different. I found that sometimes like the cheapest one is not always the best one, and the guitar that may be a little more expensive than other examples you looked at often ends up being the best one and ends up being kind of worth it. I, as much as anyone, maybe even more than most people, absolutely love finding bargains on stuff. I love finding great deals. Of course, always want to find stuff for the best price that I can. But as time has gone on, I've started to really realize some of the best stuff is usually not like the absolute cheapest version of that thing. It's not the cheapest example. It's usually not the one that's listed for the least. A lot of times it ends up being worth it to spend a little bit more to get the one that's gonna be really, really great. Now, obviously it's hard to tell sometimes if one is gonna be better than the other when you're looking at 2 online listings, but sometimes the one that isn't the cheapest one might actually be the best one. A recent example that immediately came to mind when I was thinking about this list was actually a bass that Thomas bought for his personal collection. For a while, he was looking for a jazz bass, specifically like a Japan reissue jazz bass. And we looked at literally dozens of them while we were in Japan. And we definitely found some awesome options, but the one he ended up landing on really did end up being like the one. It wasn't like a deal. It wasn't like, oh, this was the best price you were gonna find for this bass. It actually ended up being one that was definitely on like the higher end of market, but ended up being such a good example that I think it was all worth it. So this is his 75 reissue Fender jazz bass, crafted in Japan. It actually comes stock with the vintage USA pickups, so similar pickups to what you'll see on like an American vintage jazz bass. This thing absolutely rips. We were actually just recording with this with Secret Keeper just a few days ago. Got some new music coming. We had actually seen an almost identical version of this guitar in Japan for about 30% less, and got it down, started playing it, and it was good. But there was just something about it. It wasn't perfect. The fretboard, I remember, was really light on it, and it wasn't in the best shape. And then maybe a few weeks after that, this popped up and was like, wow, that looks like exactly what we want. But I remember the price was a little high, but still went ahead and went for it, and I'm glad he did because this is really, really great. Once you get the instrument and it is the one, it feels right, you're usually not going to be kicking yourself for spending a little more to get the one that you actually want. Yeah, sometimes it's not all about finding the best deal. It's about finding the coolest guitar or coolest bass in the situation. I would say this was a perfect example of a time when the best deal was not the best guitar. And that leads us into number 4, which is making sure that you find your guitar with all of the right pieces to it. Now, what I mean by this is not that every guitar has to be all original, but finding something that has all the actual components you need to use it. For example, on like a guitar with a locking tremolo system, making sure that it not only has the tremolo arm, but of course the locking pieces. I can't tell you how many times I have run into a guitar for a deceivingly low price that's maybe missing the locking pieces or missing the trem arm in this sort of situation. And everything seems good on it, and you go, okay, I'll go ahead and buy it. And then you either have a really hard time finding replacement parts for it, or once you get the replacement parts in, it doesn't play right, it doesn't set up right, something's not there. This kind of goes hand in hand with number 5, which is that sometimes that super cheap one that maybe is missing some parts isn't actually as much of a deal as you might think, and getting into the one that's actually correct is going to make your life a lot easier. This specific green flag was actually suggested by our tech Kaylee, as she know that a lot of times, especially with like 80s, 90s kind of shred guitars, stuff from like Jackson, Ibanez, that sort of thing, sometimes we'll get in really cool examples that'll be missing components and it'll be really, really hard to source those parts for. But whenever we find them, when they have everything with them, they're pretty much ready to go. They always set up so much nicer, and it's just usually a good indicator that that's gonna be a good guitar. Now, when you're talking about golden era vintage stuff from the 50s and 60s, there's a lot more availability of replacement parts, but with some of the more, I'm not gonna say obscure, but maybe harder to find stuff that wasn't made in as big of production numbers as the older Fender and Gibson stuff, sometimes getting those original locking pieces or other necessary components can actually be really hard to track down. Getting stuff in where it's all there, it has everything, is usually a good sign. Before we get into number 3, I did want to plug that we are an e-commerce based music gear shop. So if you want to check out any of the stuff we have for sale, go to aflashphotogear.com or click on the QR code there and check it out. We have a pretty huge selection of guitars, basses, some synths, lots of pedals, even some amps, and we are adding new items daily, so make sure you keep up with the site. The way that we fund this channel and everything that we do is, of course, through our site. So if you are in the market for anything, please check it out, and we would really appreciate that. So number 3 is going to be that any imperfections on the guitar are clearly noted. This can apply both when you're shopping in person and talking to somebody in person, or you're looking at a listing online. It's always a good sign when you're at a shop and you pick up a guitar and you start looking at it that the person that's working there tells you like, hey, this guitar has these parts replaced, or hey, this has this repair, or whatever it is. If they're being upfront and telling you about it before you even have to ask, that is usually a good sign that they're being transparent. It's so annoying when you're looking at something and the person that's selling it has no interest in conveying that like, hey, there's problems with this thing, and maybe they're hoping you don't notice, and maybe it'll take you to point it out for them to go, oh yeah, there's XYZ wrong with it. When someone's being upfront and they're immediately ready to tell you, all the information, good and bad on the instrument, that is usually a good sign that they are being upfront with you. I know for us, I always try to detail everything in the listings, whether it's anything from a small cosmetic scratch, or if there's been a replaced part, or if there's been a repair, or anything like that. I promise you it is in our best interest to do nothing but represent that as fairly as we possibly can. As a small side note, I've been doing e-commerce for a long time. I've sold a ton of stuff online, even way before A Flash for the Gear. I've been selling all kinds of stuff in e-commerce, and I promise there's absolutely no incentive to advertise your stuff as anything but exactly what it is. While it may be easy to think, oh, I'm gonna write this listing that sells this item super hard and maybe omit small details so that way people aren't deterred from buying, I promise that just causes more headache later. If you describe stuff as better than it is, you're gonna end up with returns, which cost money and time and hassle, and no one wants to deal with that. To me, the best way to go about things is just to be super honest about everything, describe every imperfection, because that's gonna lead to somebody receiving the item and actually being happy with it, rather than maybe you make an extra sale here and there, but then people are receiving your items and going, oh, this isn't what I expected, as that's not how you described it. So no one wants to deal with that, whether you're a buyer or a seller. So just be as honest and transparent as possible, and I promise that it's going to get you a lot further than the extra sale will get you when that sale just turns into a return or a disgruntled person or any of that. So number 2, and this is definitely an important one and one that we get asked about a lot, and that is making sure that the guitar you're looking at, especially again, used in vintage, has room for adjustment. This means if you're looking at an acoustic, there's room on the saddle to bring the action down. This means that the truss rod on the guitar can be moved in both directions with room. I know for us, that's something that we check on every single instrument that comes through. We always make sure that the truss rod has room in both directions, and if it doesn't, then obviously that's not gonna meet our quality standards, and that's going to get listed accordingly. So you can trust that if it's listed with us, the truss rod has room. That to us is really, really relevant, as that's gonna allow you to adjust it for years to come. Whenever you find a guitar where the truss rod is like maxed out, on an acoustic the saddle's all the way down, it's usually indication that it's gonna need some more invasive repair or setup work in the near future, and nobody wants to deal with that. So I would say looking for guitars that have room to adjust in all directions is really important. I know with like bolt-on Fender guitars, obviously you can always kind of shim the neck, basically moving the neck angle up or down a bit, and that will dictate how much you need to move your saddles up or down. That's not to say that every guitar that, one kind of adjustment measure is pushed all the way one way or the other is always a bad thing. But it's usually the best when it's somewhere in the middle, because that means that in its current configuration, you have room to move things around a little bit in either direction if you need to. Now with vintage stuff, you obviously might need to have a little bit more leniency here, as these are older instruments, and sometimes the best way that something plays is to push it pretty close to like its max in one way or the other. But in general, just having some room to adjust your guitar is going to be a good thing, and definitely something that I would take a look at whenever you're looking at an instrument. If you're buying from a reputable dealer, it should be noted that they're usually already going to check for that. So even if it is set up in a way that looks like, oh, the saddle's really low, if they're not noting otherwise, they probably have it set that way for a reason, and they're probably not withholding information from you. At least I would hope not. You become reputable from doing the right thing. Yeah, just make sure that your instrument has room for you to adjust it, as that is going to be something that's going to happen within the life of the instrument. So before we get to number 1, we do have an honorable mention that I want to talk about, which actually Thomas brought up. This plays in with a lot of these. A big green flag is when the person or shop that you are communicating with in order to get this guitar is easy to talk to. There's someone that is easy to work with. They answer your questions in a timely manner. They give you honest answers. Maybe it's not even always the answer you want, but they're giving you a good faith answer, even if sometimes that's I don't know, because that is a relevant answer. There is no one on this earth that knows every last thing about every single guitar ever produced. Somebody who is an open communicator, easy to work with, that's usually a good sign. That's something you should always look out for, whether you're shopping online or in person. And that also applies whether it's an individual you're buying from or a shop that you're buying from. Just because somebody's difficult doesn't mean that their item is bad by any means. I'm sure we all have stories of a deal that was really weird, but we ended up with a great instrument out of it. Just in general, the path of least resistance is usually a good one. So finding easy people to work with is the best, so we love that. All right, and number one, which kind of combines all this stuff into one. If the guitar you're looking at is the exact one you're looking for, by that I mean it's the color you want, it's the year range you want, there's no compromises, it's just the version you're looking for. Even if it's not the craziest deal, that's a green flag. If you're finding the exact specs, all that stuff, that's a good sign. I know sometimes it's really easy to get caught up in the deal and like, man, I really want this cool color Fender, I want this tangerine colored Strat that's made in Japan, but it's not the cheapest Japan-made Strat out there. There's lots of sunburst ones or black ones that are cheaper. Sometimes it's really easy to say, well, let me just pick up the best price one I can find no matter the color. If you don't care, that's also like totally irrelevant. But if you're shopping for something in a cool color or with a specific spec or specific configuration, hold out and get the one that's the one you're actually looking for. Even if it costs a little bit more money or time, to me, I've always found that to be worth it. Like we looked at with Thomas's jazz bass, I'm sure if he wanted just any color, could have definitely found one for a bit cheaper, but he liked that color scheme on that guitar. So that's the bass he went with. It wasn't we, it was you. You made that choice. And the block inlays. The more compromises, the cheaper you can find stuff, which that's another video for another day. But if you're after a specific thing, get the one you want. I promise it's worth it. I know for me, sometimes I'll find like a really great deal on something I'm looking for myself and I'll go ahead and pick it up, but maybe it's not like the exact one I wanted, maybe it's not the right color, and I'm always still searching for that right color one later. There's something to be said for the thrill of the hunt, so no discredit there. I personally still enjoy that. If that's not you, just find the right one. You don't need to stop early at the one that's almost there. It's worth finding exactly what you're looking for. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I know I had fun making this list as well as doing the red flags one we did like a year ago. So if you haven't checked that one out, be sure to check it out. I just wanted to do something that was like a little more positive today. Let us know down below in the comments if you guys have any like particular buying experiences that you remember going really well. We'd love to read your guys' stories and see what some of your guys' green flags were, or if you guys have kind of drawn commonalities from different guitar finds over the years. We'd love to read your guys' comments. Also, we are going to be in Orlando, Florida for the Orlando Guitar Show very soon, which is kind of like our home show. We'll also have some other cities coming up later in the year, such as Nashville, Dallas, Asheville, and we're excited for those as well. So we will see you guys out there. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to hang out with us today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share the video with your friends. We will see you in another video soon. Bye.